Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Venessa. I am the business owner and principal at Orange Door Property. And as I mentioned earlier, we are a mobile real estate agency. So we do not have a shop front, which is very different to traditional real estate. We have operated now for the last 5 years. And because we are mobile, that allows us to sell and property manage in a very, very wide area. So we sell and property manage anywhere from Brisbane Bay out to Toowoomba and from the sunny coast down to the Gold Coast. So we are literally driving all day, every day. But that's okay. I actually love it because it really helps me keep my finger on the pulse on what is happening in many of the different cities and shires throughout southeast Queensland. So what's happening down at the Gold Coast doesn't necessarily happen up at the sunny coast, and what happens Brisbane Bay certainly doesn't happen in Toowoomba or Ipswich. So it's all different in terms of real estate in the different areas that I do service. So we only have a small team. So there's myself, I have one sales agent and 2 admin assistants. And yeah, we're pretty busy. I really need more staff, but anyway, that's another story for another day. So we also have another point of difference, and that is the fact that I don't sell property. So traditionally in most real estate agencies, you will see that the principals sell real estate and then they hire property managers to manage their rent roll. So I don't sell, I manage our rent roll. So the reason I do that, for a couple of different reasons, I actually have a property portfolio of my own. So before I got into real estate, so prior to 5 years ago, I would hire, or, go to a real estate and have them property manage my investment portfolio. And over the years, I've just been really frustrated and disheartened by the service that I was receiving from property managers in real estate agencies. And probably the couple of biggest things that really bothered me was that every single time I called to have a chat with someone about my property, it was a different person. Sophie was no longer there, it was now Jane. And then when I ring a few months later, Jane's gone, I now got to talk to Troy. Troy's gone, now I've got to talk to Julie. So I felt like my property was just sort of being handed around, I guess, or my properties were being handed around. And when that happens, stuff does fall between the cracks. That is what happens. If Troy, Julie, Sophie, whoever else I was speaking to didn't make notes in the system as to what was happening with my property or what was happening with the tenants, then all of that just disappears. The second biggest thing that I struggled with was a lot of the people that were managing my properties were very young. So, sometimes I'd have like a 22 or a 23-year-old property manager. That bugged me because how could they possibly know how to manage a property when they still live at home with mum and dad and they don't even pay rent? How do they understand it from a tenant's perspective? How do they understand it from a homeowner's perspective? They just don't have enough experience in life. And especially, if any of you have investment properties or you just understand humans in general, there's always conflict, especially, at different times with tenants. They don't want to pay their rent, they want stuff done at the property, whatever the issues are. You do need to have a little bit of maturity, a little bit of life experience under your belt to be able to deal with a lot of the stuff that does happen between humans. And then lastly, routine inspections weren't getting done. So I actually had a property of mine trashed. The tenants just up and left in the middle of the night, and I met the owner of the business there actually a few days after they had realised that the tenant had taken off and the house was trashed. So it wasn't just trashed as in there was certainly damage, but they had decided to paint the entry tiles, which were brown. They decided to paint them white, as you do. They decided to paint a wall red, and they didn't paint from one corner to the other corner. They just kind of stopped in the middle and did these ones. So no one does that in the middle of the night before they leave, so it would have had to have been done in the last 3 months at least. But the manager of the property agency that I was working with at the moment, or the boss rather, she told me that they hadn't done an inspection in over 9 months. So why is that happening? Why is that happening? So I thought to myself, how hard is it? I'll start up my own real estate agency. I love property. It's just what I love. It's my interest, it's my passion. And all I have to do is answer the phone and do what I say I'm going to do. And that was 5 years ago. And here we are, post-COVID, driving around southeast Queensland, managing lots of property and selling in between times as well. Okay, so as I said before, we're a mobile agency. We service a very wide area. I'm the owner and the principal, and I manage the rent roll. So when I say I manage the rent roll, I actually manage the rent roll. I rock up in my little car and I do inspections every 3 months. The trades call me, the tenants call me, the owners call me. I just don't say that I manage the rent roll. I'm actually managing the rent roll. I have obviously assistants back in the office because I drive all day, and lucky for Bluetooth these days and hands-free. I'm on the phone to my assistants while I'm driving, getting them to issue work orders and do things behind the scenes, but I am the one that physically goes around and does the property management role. Okay, this is a real big one. I have investment properties of my own, so I understand firsthand what it's like to be an investor, okay? Everyone's saying, oh my gosh, how terrible it is, tenants' rent's going up, how are they going to afford it? Well, us mortgage holders, us investment owners, we're struggling at the moment as well on the other side of the coin with the rising of interest rates. So it's affecting everybody. So I do understand the pain when I have to ask for a hot water system and it's going to cost $2,000. I know that it's usually coming out of perhaps the family budget at different times, and I do understand what that's like. Now, the other thing, and this is really big for us at Orange Door Property, when you have a tenant in a property and that tenant has expressed that they wish to stay on as their lease renewal is coming up to being due, they want to stay on, and what we find that happens a lot in the industry is that a property manager will say, oh, we'll just put up the rent $10, $15, maybe $20 at the moment in this market. And obviously the tenant accepts and they sign their new tenancy paperwork and they're locked into another lease for 12 months. Now, every single time a lease is up for renewal, I always do a rental appraisal to see what's happening, especially at the moment because the market is just moving, like no tomorrow, literally, and it has done for the last couple of years. So I do a rental appraisal every single time, and in some cases, rent does have to go up $50, $80, $100, $120. I recently took over management of 2 properties at Clontarf, and one property was undervalued by $265 a week and the other property was undervalued by $190 a week. And in the market that we're in at the moment, with mortgage rates going up and especially in the Ipswich area, land rates have gone up as well because of the value of land. So what's that? That's $1,000 a month for the $265 property, or just over, and just under $800 a month for the $190 property. So being undervalued like that, it's a bit cruel to the tenants insofar as if they ever do decide to leave and go somewhere else, they're literally going to have bill shock or rent shock or whatever you want to call it, because a property to be undervalued by $265 is just ridiculous. So when property managers are putting up the rent $15 a week at lease renewal, it's not what the market says that rent should be at, where that rent should be at for that property in that point of time. So, but of course, all rent increases are negotiable. So the $265 increase we negotiated to $190 a week, and the $190 increase we negotiated $160 a week. So, and most tenants are aware that the property market has moved quite significantly in the last few years, and anyone can jump on realestate.com and see houses in their area that are similar to what they're living in, and they can see what is available for rent at the moment and at what price. So 9 times out of 10, most tenants are re-signing their leases because they know we're not trying to rip them off, we're just asking them to pay what the market value for that property is. Okay, as I said before, we manage a very wide area. So that's us in a triangle. So I just wanted to run through some figures from the last quarter, and I am mindful that this quarter's almost finished, but the figures obviously haven't been released. So if we have a look at some property figures, the change in rents. So if we have a look at Brisbane here, the median rent in Brisbane at the moment, or from the last quarter, so January to March, earlier this year, is $599 a week. That's your average rent price in Brisbane. In the last quarter, it has gone up by 1.8%, and in the last 12 months, rents in Brisbane have increased by 12.3% in the last 12 months, as we would have expected with the property market that we've had. Vacancy rates. So 12 months ago in Brisbane, our vacancy rates were sitting at 1.2%, and in the last quarter, from January to March, they've dropped down a little bit to 1.1%. So we're still not seeing a whole lot of empty properties at all. And I know from my own experience with obviously renting and having empty properties, I have a tenant exit on a Monday, let's say. I go in and do my thing on a Tuesday, and I've got a tenant moving in on a Wednesday. There is a huge demand still for rental properties, and there is certainly a lack of supply. So gross yields. So 12 months ago, our gross yields were 3.51%, and in the quarter just gone, January to March, they had risen slightly to 4.34%, which is always good for any investor. Okay, unit rental growth versus, or not versus, but it actually topped housing rental growth in the quarter of January to March. So Australia-wide, unit rents rose by 3.9% over the last quarter, which was up from 2.8% in the December quarter last year. And national house rents rose from 1.7% in December quarter last year, to 2% in the quarter just gone, January to March. So we can attribute that rental growth in units to obviously property going up all over, but there is an increased demand obviously with migration. So all of our borders have opened up across the world now, so we're getting lots of people come in wanting to study or find employment here, and obviously it's much cheaper to buy a unit than what it is to buy a house, so that has certainly seen a lot of growth there. And of course there is a shortage of rental supply, so where some people might typically want to live in a house, but there are no houses available, so they start to extend their search into units or whatever's available really. Beggars can't be choosers, unfortunately, in the property market that we were experiencing. So I just wanted to take a quick look at Sydney and Melbourne as well. So it was really interesting during COVID and all the lockdowns that not necessarily we had up here in Brisbane, but certainly down in the southern states. We experienced a huge migration of families, people from the southern states moving up to Queensland, and that certainly helped our property market boom like it did. If you owned a half-decent house somewhere in or around Sydney suburbs, Melbourne suburbs, and you wanted to sell that, $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, depends where you live. You take that lovely cash and you bring it up to Brisbane, and you can get twice the house in a great area for half the price. So if we had a property on the market for, say, I don't know, offers over 800,000, they'd be like, right, we'll offer $1 million cash, you know, no conditions. So that was certainly that was certainly helping to boost our market here. But that's not the case at the minute. So ever since the lockdowns have obviously finished and COVID is now hopefully behind us, we've got a lot of overseas migrants and international students coming to our capital cities, but the majority of overseas immigrants and international students will want to stay or want to live in Melbourne and Sydney. Certainly we do receive a fair number up here as well, but the popular capital cities are Sydney and Melbourne, and that has certainly bolstered up now the property market down there. And now the pendulum has actually swung the other way. So during COVID, our property market in Brisbane went nuts. Sydney and Melbourne actually fell, and now it's the other way. Sydney and Melbourne are now actually doing better than what we are, which is good because that means us people up here in Brisbane have further to go in terms of price. Okay, so I get this question asked a lot as an investor and as a real estate agent. How do I know what property to buy? Where do I buy? How much do I pay? Is this house that I'm looking at right here, is that worth me buying? So obviously we need to look at what we can see, which is, okay, is it a brick house with tiles, or is it an old timber house? Is it on a flat block? Is it on a sloping block? How many beds, baths, how many cars? What's the proximity to amenities like schools, shops, public transport? Has the property ever been flooded? Which has certainly been a big question in the last 18 months since we had our terrible water events happen earlier last year. And then, of course, other infrastructure on the property, like a shed, a pool. Is it fully fenced? Is it on acreage? And so on. Any easements on the property, etc. So as an investor, but as an investor, I don't look for a property that's a timber house. I'm not interested in buying a timber house. I don't really want to spend 20 grand every 10 years to get the thing painted on the outside. That doesn't stack up for me in terms of dollars. So as an investor, I'm always looking for a brick and tile house. Flat block versus sloping block. Nothing wrong with a sloping block as long as it there's not a lot of retaining walls along it or through it that you need to maintain, because as an investor, that's not what we're looking for. We don't want to spend that money. How many beds, how many baths, how many cars? So look, there's all sorts of different people looking for houses. You've got families, you've got single people, you've got couples. Doesn't really matter how many beds, baths or cars a property has. But these days we find that a lot of people are asking for 2 bathrooms. They don't really want 1 bathroom anymore, which is typically what houses used to have, 3 bed, 1 bath. And also we're also looking for 2 cars as well. So most people in a couple, or even mum and dad, she goes one way, he goes the other, so definitely need 2 cars. Proximity to amenities. So that obviously depends on the I guess, goal of the person buying the property. If you're looking to land bank and you want to buy an old timber, half dilapidated cottage on acreage somewhere, out at Boona or wherever, then of course there's not going to be a lot of amenities in that the proximity to the home that you've bought, but most people that like to rent, and as an investor, we want to be close to anything that we think a tenant might need. Schools, shops, public transport, sporting, anything like that. Now, flood concern. Obviously, early last year with the flooding that we had throughout southeast Queensland, it was devastating for so many people. As investors, we don't really want to buy flood properties. They are usually priced a lot cheaper than what a property is that's not been flooded, but we really don't want to go down that path. Just for the cost of insurance. So Suncorp is one of the few people that actually do cover for flood if the property has been flooded prior, and your quote's going to be ridiculous. So unless there's some other reason why you would buy that property, as an investor, you probably wouldn't want to pay 10 to 15 grand to insure the property every year in the event of flood. And then, of course, other infrastructure on the property. So pools are one of those things where you've got the whole group that love them, and then you've got the whole group that hate them. So if you think everyone loves a pool, you're wrong. A lot of people don't like pools. So it is really a personal choice, I suppose, as to whether you want to buy a house with a pool or whether you want to put a pool into that house. But sheds, on the other hand, are a really big draw card. So I can typically get more rent for a property that has a shed versus a property that doesn't. So especially a larger shed. So not just a shed that would take 2 cars, for example, but a shed where you've got lots of storage. So maybe a 4-bay shed, or you've got a garden shed plus a 2-bay shed plus another 3 sheds on the property. Anything like that, we get a lot more money for storage and sheds. And guys love their man caves. They've got the boat and a tractor and a whatever they've got. Sheds are very, very popular. Okay, so also when us investors are looking for a property, we also typically, well, I do, but that's because I'm a real estate agent, 9 times out of 10, if you don't know what the calculation is, you would just contact your accountant. But there is a little formula that you can use to work out what the yield would be on a property. If you were just scrolling through realestate.com and think, oh wow, I really like that one. It's brick and tile, it's got 3 sheds, it's close to amenities. I wonder what the rental yield on that would be. So there is a formula down here. So let's just say, and I'll run through some examples with you a little bit later so you can see how it works in real life, but $520 a week is what the real estate agent has appraised the property at. So usually, most of the time when you're scrolling through realestate.com.au online, the selling agent will include a rental appraisal. So you can take that rental amount, you multiply it by 52, which is your annual rent, and that comes to $27,040. You divide that by the purchase price. So let's say the purchase price was $500,000. That should not be a dollar sign, my bad. 0.054%. You multiply that by 100 and you're sitting at 5.41% rental return, gross rental yield on this scenario, okay? So I've translated it here to a few properties that we have recently sold. So we sold a beautiful beachfront apartment at Surfers Paradise, 2 bed, 2 bath, 1 car. The advertised price was $1,125,000. The sale price was $1,075,000, and the rental appraisal range was between $900 and $950 a week. So if we have a look at the $900 a week, which is the lower part of the appraisal that I gave, you're sitting at a 4.35% gross rental yield. And then if you're looking at the $950 per week rental, the top end of my rental appraisal, you're sitting at 4.59%. Now, in the case of units, I don't particularly love them in terms of investment because of body corporate costs and all those sorts of things. They just add another cost onto an investor. However, I don't say that across the board. It all depends where you're buying, what area you're buying, but you've always got to look at those body corporate costs that can really chew into your rental yield. We recently sold a 3 bed, 1 bath, 1 car home at Sadler's Crossing, which is a very nice suburb in Ipswich. The advertised price was $439,000. The sale price was $468,000, and my rental appraisal was $440,000 to $480,000. And you can see here the yields are 4.88 up to 5.33%. And lastly, and this one's my favourite, we sold a property at Goodna that had a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom, 1 car house at the front of the block, and at the back of the block it had a granny flat. Granny flat's my favourite. 2 bed, 1 bath granny flat that was only, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years old. It was really lovely actually, much nicer than the front house. The advertised price on this property was $649,000. The sale price was $614,000. The rental appraisal range, $480,000 for the front house and $355,000 for the granny flat at the back. Rental yield, 7.07%. So I'm sure you would all be aware, but any property with a granny flat at the back obviously increases your rental yields considerably if it's bought at the right price. So I am a huge fan of being able to add a dwelling at the back of a house if you have the room. And if you can find a builder that can do it in a short amount of time. Okay, so gross rental yield versus net rental yield. So the percentages that I gave you before are gross rental yields. Okay, so, sorry, what have I done there? Gross rental yield. So that just means the very simple basic calculation that I gave you a few slides back. However, your net rental yield involves removing all of your expenses that you would have in a 12-month period from that property cost. Okay, so you've got water rates, you've got land rates, what else we've got? Property management fees, body corporate fees if you bought a unit, and any repairs and maintenance over a 12-month period. You would, yeah, insurance, I didn't put that in, and any other costs associated with owning an investment. Once you deduct those expenses, you then have a net rental yield. But for the purposes of scrolling through realestate.com, the gross rental yield is perfectly fine to use. And as investors, we like to stick around the 6%. We want to get as close, if not over, 6%. Us investors do believe that that is kind of the magic number on how we can have the property pretty much pay for itself in terms of its expenses every year without me having to dip into my back pocket and which would ultimately affect my family budget.
Thank you very much.